Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Samach Aleph. Sorry for the last minute change in plans. We're starting on the very last line of Daf Samach Amud Beis, and we're explaining a Mishnah which spoke about Darchei Shalom. The Mishnah can be found on the very bottom of Nun Amud Aleph, going up to the top of Nun Amud Beis. And on Nun Amud Beis at the top in that Mishnah, we had learned that the nets of Chayas, Ofos, and Dagin, Yesh Bem Shum Gezem Bnei Darchei Shalom, that there is a din of Darchei Shalom that we're not supposed to take people's items that they trapped in certain kinds of traps. And now the Gemara is going to qualify that on the very last line of Samach Amud Beis, last couple of words. It only says Darkei Shalom, and the Gemara starts to detail what types of traps we're talking about. If we're dealing with Be'uzle ve'ohare, and if you look at Rashi, Uzle, he says Rishtos shel chutin sheyesh lam toch. It's not just like they're stuck on a wire. They're actually inside a circular or spherical net. That's different. That's one case. That's kule alma lo pligi. As we turn to the top of Samach Aleph, everyone agrees, as Rashi says, the cave the yeshlam toch kana lo kelav v'habe gezel gamor. No, nobody argues in that case. So let's imagine that we had some type of clever contraption that if a fish could swim in and not swim out, that's pashat gezel if you steal from. That's not darkei shalom. However, kipligi, where is the machlokes in our Mishnah between the two shitas? Kipligi, belechi, bekokri. These are the kinds of things that are, getting trapped on a hook or getting trapped with a line. Some of those things there. That's where we have our machlokes. The Gemara on Samach Aleph Amud Aleph continues right at the second line. What is going on in that case? Very interesting. We saw the Rabbi Yossi pushed back a few times. This was on the top of the Testament days, and there he had said a couple of times, "I disagree with you. It's Gezel Gomer, Gezel Gomer." Now we see that the Gezel Gomer is not Gezel Gomer Mido, right? It's only Gezel Gomer Midivrayim. It's only a Din D'Rabbanan. And then the Gemara says, I don't understand, Rabbi Yossi. Why are you going to length to say that it's Gezel Gomer if it's only Gezel Gomer Midivrayim, if it's only D'Rabbanan? What's the difference between that and Darkei Shalom? They're the same thing. Says the Gemara, the difference is Lotzio B'dayon. The nafkamina is a halachic outcome. Am I allowed to go to Bezdin and bring this person as a plaintiff, defendant, the whole 9 yards? So when we're talking about something that's midivrayim, that's gezel midivrayim, that's a din d'Rabbanan of gezel, we can bring them to Bezdin. But if it's only because of darkei shalom and somebody breaks that rule, so then the din is that they have no recourse in Bezdin. The Gemara says 5 lines down on Samach Aleph that we said that if there's a poor person who's climbed up an olive tree and he's grabbing olives, that you're not allowed to take the olives below him. And the Brisa adds Tana, everyone agrees that if you do so biyad with your bare hand, you pluck one off and then you drop it and you'll pick it up later when you get down to the bottom of the tree. To take that, you're for sure not allowed to do. And the Gemara tells an odd story. The Gemara says, Rav Kahana have a Ka'azim Hutzal. He's going to the city of Hutzal. Chazialu Gabra. There was this guy, and he was throwing sticks, Rashi says. He was throwing maklos. He was throwing sticks up into the tree. And as he would do so, some of the olives would fall to the ground. And then Azal, Rav Kahana went and he went down, picked one up, and he put one in his mouth. The guy looked down from the top of the tree. Amar le, Hazimar dibiyadai shiditinu. You should just know that I took this with my bare hands. Namely, that's Gezel Gomer Rav Kahana. And what does the Gemara say? Amar le, Rav Kahana says back to the guy at the top of the tree, it must be that Me'asre Rav Yoshia asa, that you are from the city where Rav Yoshia is. And Rashi here on the side, 10 lines down, 11 lines down, says Rav Yoshia asa lefichach atabaki bedin and lefi shehu dorish larav modian. Rav Yoshia would speak about these halachos regularly. You must be a Talmud Chacham. Kari alei v'tzadik yisododam, and he said about him that this guy was a big tzaddik. So the Rashba over here was very upset. Well, a lot of the Rishonim are bothered. What was Rav Kahana doing? That you can walk under a tree. At the very minimum, it's darkei shalom, and at the maximum, it's gzela d'oraisa. What's going on here? The Rashba says that he actually thought it was a goy. He thought that this person was not a yid, and there is no din of darkei shalom. L'chor, we'd have to say the sheet of darkei shalom, because even by a goy we have gezel akum midrabbanan. So it must be that it's mutter, mida oraisa, and mipnei darkei shalom. If it's a goy, the only din of darkei shalom applies to it. So he thought he was a goy. When he responded by saying, "By the way, I plucked it with my hand," Rav Kahana did the mental gymnastics and recognized that this person was taka, a yid. Says the Gemara, third of the way down, that if a guy goes into the field and starts to pick up leket shicha and peh, we don't stop him from doing so. Tan Rabbanan, the Brisa writes, that when we are feeding Jews or we're being farnex them with tzedakah, it's not only Jews, it's also nachrim. Umevakrin chole nachrim im chole Israel. When you're doing bikkur cholim, it's not just for Jews, it's also for goyim. And as well, the korban meisei nachrim im meisei Israel mimnei darkei shalom. And the Gemara concludes with this brisa saying that not only do we do those things, we also bury them together. Now, it's actually not literally together. That's what Rashi says, 12, 13 lines down. Dibra maschel im meisei Israel lo bekivrei Yisrael elamis asken bohem im mitzaum harugim im Yisrael. That if we find a goy that's been killed alongside a yid, we bury both of them. We don't just bury them. That should be somewhat clear. The Gemara says halfway down, I'm allowed to lend, a woman is allowed to lend to her friend. And if this friend is chashuda ala shvius, that if we're after this man beer where we're no longer allowed to have certain foods in our house, but this woman is chashuda ala shvius, I'm still allowed to lend her some of my kitchen items. What am I allowed to lend? Napa v'kabra. These are different types of sifters. The rechaim is like a handle. The tanner is an oven. Aval lo savor v'lo sitchan ima. But I can't actually work biyadayim with her. That I can't do. I can't work on her stuff because she's chashuda ala shvius, and therefore to do that would be to violate. This is what Rashi says a third of the way down. Abraham Maskell, lo sabur v'lo sitchan l'sayeh mibnei she'asr l'sayeh biyadayim yedei over avera b'shas v'avera. Not allowed to help them while they're doing it. There's a lot of lumdus in this Rashi. If you look at the language, it's very carefully crafted, as usual. He says it's l'sayeh mibnei she'asr l'sayeh biyadayim. You're not allowed to help them with your hands. Yedei over avera. Those who are doing a verse b'shas v'avera. Only if it's b'shas. Maybe I could do something in advance. Like in the first part of the Mishnah, I'm allowed to leave them kalim, that they can do. That's not me helping them. So that's what the Gemara says over here, the Mishnah. And then that's case number one, that I can lend out certain utensils, but I can't work with them. However, case number two in our Mishnah says as follows, that when it comes to a woman who's an am ha'aretz, and so a woman who's a chaver, she's an eshes chaver, she knows halacha, and she has a friend who's an am ha'aretz. So by her, we distinguish. We say that we can give her a nap of a kabra, and then, unlike the first case, we say that we can do all of the sifting and all of the grinding and all of the separating with her. So that's not misayot barber. The Gemara is going to ask about that. Once the water is added to the flour after they've done the grinding, then the Eishes Chaver has to back off. Then she can't help anymore. So we see a gentle distinction between the first case in our Mishnah, which is an Isha Chashuda ala Shvius, and the second case, which is an Eishes Am Ha'aretz. The Chula, and in all of these cases, the only reason why we can lend anything to them in the first place, why are we involved in this? Don't touch us with a 10-foot pole. These people aren't from. Why are we supporting what they're doing? It says the Gemara, this is the right way to do things. That we should be involved with them. That's what Rashi says over here. That when it says why should we lend them anything? It must be, says Rashi, so that there's good feelings between us and between them. We also help out people who are not Jews during Shvius. We don't know what this means yet. We'll see this another day. But not through the hands of Israel. Again, cryptic for now. And as well, one can also ask as to how one is doing in regards to a god mibnei darkei shalom. Now, this doesn't mean the polite good morning, good afternoon. That's not what that means. We know that there are Tanaim who are Amoraim who are known that no one could ever beat them to say a greeting to a guy. That's not what we're talking about. So take a look at Rashi just to our side, 2/3 of the way down to Ramaskal Shalom Shalom. You can even use the term shalom. I can tell you from experience, I regularly am in a scenario where somebody will come over to me and say shalom, and the din is that we are allowed to reciprocate. That's what Rashi says, is that we're talking about a case scenario over here where we're using the word shalom as a reference to a goy, and the Gemara says that b'nei darkei shalom, that's permissible. So now the question that I've already foreshadowed, let's ask, what was the difference between case one, where we're dealing with a woman who's chashuda ala shvius, as opposed to case two, where we're dealing with an eshes am ha'aretz? Different things. Chashuda ala shvius is someone who doesn't keep the halachos of shvius. Chashuda, the eshes am ha'aretz, is someone who's perhaps, we're concerned that maybe her food is tevel. Not exactly the same concern. But why do we distinguish where in the first case you're allowed to lend, but you're not allowed to do anything via dime? And in the second case where you can lend and help, just not once the water's been added to the flour. The Gemara says, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. Amar Abaye, answer number one, Rov Amei Haaretz Ma'asr Nehem. We assume that Rov of the Amei Haaretz, they would be Ma'asr their food anyways. So in that case, because she's only chashudan meiser, and because there we have a rove, so the darchei shalom can override the mute that perhaps she didn't do that. That's totally fine. Rava Amar no. Hachaba Amma Aretz Rav Meir. We're actually talking about an Amma Aretz of Rav Meir who we don't believe did Meister well. But what we're talking about in our Mishnah is something different. Tuma B'Tara D'Rabbanan. We're talking about a case of Tuma B'Tara, which is only of a rabbinic nature, and the Darkei Shalom will override that. What is this talking about? We don't know. So the Gemara says, 6 lines from the bottom, Samach Aleph Amid Aleph, Titanya. Eizu Am Ha'aretz. Who is considered to be an Am Ha'aretz? Says the Gemara, Kol She'enu Ochel Chula V'B'Tara D'Rav Meir. Rav Meir says that an Am Ha'aretz is a person who doesn't eat his chulin b'tahara. The Chachamim omrim kol she'eno me'aser peirosam. And the Chachamim say that we're talking about someone who's not me'aser their peiros. That's the definition of an Am Ha'aretz. But according to this first approach of Rav Meir, the din d'Rabbanan that we're talking about in our Mishnah is a concern of someone who may not eat their chulin b'tahara. That's what's going on in case number 2 of our Mishnah, with this woman who's an Eshes Am Ha'aretz, and Darkei Shalom is able to override the rabbinic concern of her not eating chulin, of the Eshes Am Ha'aretz not eating chulin b'tahara. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. In the second case, we learned but when we say in the second case that once the water is added, that the Eshes Chaver is no longer allowed to assist anymore, that's on already when we have so that implies that the Reisha is not talking about Tuma B'Tara, which means that we're no longer on a level playing field, because that means that the Reisha and the Sefer are not even comparable cases anymore. So it says the Gemara, Reisha v'Sefer b'Tuma B'Tara. Really, both cases. Case number 1 about the woman who's Tashud ala Shvius, and case number 2, the Eshes Am Ha'aretz, both of them are talking about the same din of Tuma B'Tara. The Reisha b'Tumas Chulin, the Sefer b'Tumas Chala. That there's a difference between Tumas Chulin, which is what case number 1 is talking about, and V'Seifa, the case of the Eshes Am Ha'aretz, is talking about Tumas Chala, and therefore they're very different, not comparable, and all is fine and good, a reasonable distinction, and therefore the halachos are different. In case number 1, by the woman who's chashud ala shvius, where we're talking about the Tumah Chulin, so the din is more is very machmir. But where we're talking about Tumas Chala, we can be even more makel. And the Gemara says at the very bottom of the page, hold on 1 second. It doesn't seem to work out. We have a brisa which doesn't align with something that we've said. This brings us to the top of Samach Aleph Amid Aleph at the very top. We'll be going to the 3rd line on the top of Samach Beis Amid Aleph. We have a brisa, Tochnin umafkidin. I'm allowed to grind, and I'm allowed to grind my flour. And I'm also can be mafkid. I can take my food and I can leave it etzel ochle shvius. I'm allowed to leave my food, to grind my food and leave my food in your property, even if you are not from your ochle shvius. You mamish eat food that should not be eaten because it's food from the Shemitah year. And as well, I can leave my peros there. Aval. What I cannot do is lo the ochle shvius, lo the ochle perosein betuma. But I'm not allowed to help someone with their food if they are not from. So I can put my food there, but I can't help someone else with their food. So Amar Abaye, awesome, what's going on over there? That case is a little bit different. It says the Gemara, Hasam the Kohen Achashu Lechol Truma Betuma Askinan, the Havale Tuma Doraisa. Over there, we have a case of Tuma Deoraisa, and therefore, in this case that we just brought at the top of Samach Aleph Amid Beis, this case is the case of Tuma Deoraisa, a case of a kohen that's chashed lechol truma, and therefore, in such a case, we are not allowed to do anything with those people whatsoever. We can't even leave it in their property at all. But that's because with the din deoraisa is what we're talking about. But our Mishnah is talking about a din derabanan. And by our Mishnah, we're allowed to be a little bit more mekel. And the Gemara says 6 lines down, we have another brisa. Mafkidin truma etzel Yisrael am haaretz. We're allowed to leave truma with a Yisrael who's an am haaretz, a Jew who's not knowledgeable. Below etzel kohen am haaretz, but not with a kohen who's an am haaretz. Mipnei shelibo gaspa. That doesn't seem to stem with that previous case on the top of Samach Aleph from Beis. And the Gemara responds with 2 different responses. Amar Rabbi La, Hacha b'maya skin, in what case must we be dealing with? B'kli cheresh mukaf tzamid psil. We're talking about an earthenware klicheres, We're talking about a klicheres, an earthenware vessel that's mukaf tzamid psil, that's completely sealed. And we know, because we've learned Sukkim and Chumash before, that the din is that if you have an earthenware vessel with something in it, the halacha is that even if it's in the hands of a kohen, tameh, whatever the case may be, it wouldn't become tameh, and therefore, in that case, we're allowed to, even in a case of a din doraisa, to status of doraisa tumah, it doesn't matter because he can't convey the tumah to that thing. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple. You're right that he can't, but his wife can. Why? Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, perhaps his wife is going to move that item. And the tuma of a nida is of one of the most chamor tumas. So when she simply takes the earthenware vessel and pushes it, the din is that it's completely tummy. Says that, and the Gemara says, you're right. We have to distinguish between these two brises in a different way. A very, very clean divide. In a brisa where we see that we're very concerned, that's because the peros were hochshru, they're wet. We know yad shach adam, yayin, dvash, shemen chalav, tal, dam, and mayim. All 7 of those liquids are the ones that can cause for a transfer of tuma. So in those cases, every case where we're machmir, that's because the peros are wet. In every case where we're makil, that's because the peros are dry. Or min, hold on one second. If a person's bringing wheat to someone who grinds food and they are either a kusi or an am haaretz, they remain in their status as it relates to meiser and shvis. We don't assume they swapped out any food, but that's not true in regards to tuma. But in regards to tuma, then we assume that there is a problem. So kasha, again, we see that it's not really fitting with that previous Mishnah. What are we going to do with this brisa? So the Gemara says, "Hi, my Rumia. What kind of question is this? Weren't you paying attention to the last answer we gave? Obviously, in this brisa, if we see avalo tuma, we see that there's something wrong with the tuma. We should follow the same thing we said before. Lavu kimna beperos. We're talking in 2 different cases where the peros are not moist, where there's no moisture. So then we're not worried about tuma. But where there is moisture, then we are concerned about tuma. So you can't bring a raya from that brisa." And the Gemara asks halfway down, that's so obvious from the flow of the Gemara. That's obviously not why the brisa was brought. So the Gemara says it must be that there was another question with this brisa. The flow of events here needs to be clarified. We just gave an answer in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, a third of the way down. And we can figure out all of the Mari Makomos based on whether or not the peros were moist. If the peros were moist, if they were wet, then they can transfer tuma, and if not, not. Then we ask the stira, and the Gemara says, what are you talking about? That fits into the answer that we saw earlier. This answer works for that brisa. If we say that there's no tuma concern, that's obviously because the peros are not wet. So why did you bother bringing the brisa? And the Gemara says halfway down into Karila, my Karila. According to the person who brought this brisa, what was he thinking in the first place? What was his actual question? It can't be what we thought it was. It can't be about tuma, because that we've already clarified. Says the Gemara, Mishum de kaboy lemirme achrisi Allah. There really was another question to be asked. What was the next question to be asked? Says the Gemara that we weren't focusing on the part of the Mishnah about Tumah, but rather Harei Elu b'chezkat l'meiser l'shviz. Says the Gemara, we were assuming that if we were to give our flour to a kusi or to an am haaretz, we would assume that they would not swap it out. That part is difficult. Why is that difficult? Says the Gemara, are you going to tell me that we're going to trust these people not to swap out a kusi and an am haaretz? Of course they're going to. And in fact, we have a text proof that shows us that they do. Says the Gemara, or minhu, hanosin lechamoso, meiser, eshehu nosin la, ve'eshehu notel hemena, that if I give food to my mother-in-law, I have to be meiser that which I give to her and that which I get back to her. So let's say I have 10 units. I have to take off meiser before give her 9, and then I have to take off 0.9 when I'm done. So in total, I have to give 1.9 out of the 10. I'm left with 8.1. That's because of a particular concern that we see that people may flip around. People may switch things. So if we see that even by chamosa, by one's mother-in-law, we're concerned about that, then why would we say in the brisa, when it says the line of Harei b'chet kas on the meiser the shvius, why? When I give the flour to a kusi or to an am haaretz, I should be concerned because I'm worried about chamos, I'm worried about the mother-in-law. It says the Gemara, no. There we have a specific reason why the mother-in-law is concerned. And the mother-in-law's concern is Rav Yehuda wrote, she wants to make sure that her son-in-law is doing good by her daughter, and she may not like the flour that he gave her, so she might swap it out for subin, for a little bit of a not subin, for smida, for a little bit of a better flour, whatever the case may be. Says the Gemara, fine, you answered by chamos, I gotcha, loud and clear. We're not concerned about people switching out the flour in general. We're only concerned about the cases that we saw earlier of the am haaretz. Even by the am haaretz, we're not concerned, and we're also not concerned by the mother-in-law. So let's try again. The Gemara says, are we not concerned in general about people switching out foods? 8-9 lines from the bottom. Let's say that a boy, a man, whoever is going into a hotel, and he gives to the pundakis, the innkeeper, and he gives her dough and says, "I want you to make some challah for me, please." So the din is ma'aser is mashu nosin la. He has to take 10% off the 10, so he's down to 9. Veshu notel hemena, when she gives them back, he has to be ma'aser. Again, same deal, 1.9 out of 10, only leaving 8.1. Why? So we see that the brisa by the Kusi and by the Am Haaretz, by them we were not concerned, seemingly. We were not concerned about chiluf, but over here we seem to be concerned about chiluf because the innkeeper is going to switch things around. Because the Gemara, no, Hasa Moria, here Moria over here means that she's Mora Heter. She has a svara as to why she's doing what she's doing, and it's not a rule for everyone. What's her svara? V'amra, Barbe Rava Rabbi Lechol Chamima, V'ana Echol Karira. She made his challah at 9 a.m. He didn't come back till 6 p.m. By the time he got back, his challahs were cold. He said, I want him to have warm challah. So I'm going to be machlif and take mine. I'm an amaretz, but he doesn't know that. I'm going to give him my challah. So by her, we are taka concerned, the mechalefes. But again, by the kusi and by the amaretz, we are not concerned. And the Gemara tries yet again. The akati, it's still the case. La alma lo shinan. Are you going to say that we're not concerned about chiluf? We have another raya where we see that there's chiluf. What's the raya? The brisa, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. That a from woman can be tochen, can grind flour with a woman who's an am haaretz even when she's tmeya, avalo bizman she Torah, but not when she is tehora. Rashi says 2 lines from the bottom, tochenes misayata, that she can help her, and bizman she tmeya, eshes chaver, when the eshes chaver is allowed to do, when she's tmeya. The keva di bein tuma ena regila liga betaros lo chayshin and shematito v'sitain lesoch piha. We're not talking about when the eshes ama oretz is tmeya. We're talking about when the eshes chaver is tmeya. When she's tmeya, we're not concerned about anything because she's so well trained. When she's a nida l'dugma, she's so well trained not to touch taros that she can go help. She can't touch the food, and she wouldn't touch the food because she's a nida, so we don't have to worry about her helping her under those cases. I'm sorry, and then Reb Shimon ben Elazar, no, af is man tmeya lo sitchon. Even when the eshes chaver is tmeya, she's not allowed to help the am haaretz. Why not? Because the woman who she's helping, the am haaretz, is going to try to feed her, and we're afraid that she might end up eating it, and that would, of course, be coming. It says the Gemara, Hashta Mignav Ganba, here the eshes am haaretz, who doesn't own her own bread, and she's giving her bread to the eshes chaver. If she's willing to steal the bread, says the Gemara, of course she's going to be willing to swap it out. So maybe we should be concerned about her, and maybe we should ask a kasha on the kusi and on the am haaretz. It says the Gemara, Amar Yosef, Hasam Nami Moria. Here too, they were being Mora Heter. And what was the Mora Heter as to why we should be concerned about the Eshes Am Haaretz? The Amra, Tura Midi Sheika'achla. She's saying it's not normal. When we feed animals, when we have animals that are plowing the ground, but they still graze a little bit while they're eating. So that too, when we have an Eshes Chaver, we're going to try and feed her, even though an Eshes Namar, she's going to say, you can have a little bit to eat while we're cooking, no problem at all. So the Gemara answers up all of the questions and seems to conclude that when we are talking about whether or not we have a concern about chiluf, about switching out the foods, that if I give dough to a kusi or to an am haaretz, or if I give flour to a kusi or to an am haaretz, the halacha is that we are not concerned about it. And all of the exception cases that we just went through, all of them are their own ukimtas, and none of them seem to be broadly referencing general cases, only specific cases. We'll stop right here. Emir Hashem will pick up tomorrow in person on Daf Samach Beis, and I'll have 3 lines down. Wishing you all a beautiful night.